Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, I Need That Elevator Now. So I'm an elevator technician. When they break, I'm the one who fixes them. When parts wear out, I replace them. You get it. The other day I was on a job replacing a worn-out emergency light. Back in the day it was a habit to use the battery of the emergency light to power the elevator's siren system. Modern emergency lights have different voltages being LED, so I can't use the old way of connecting everything. So, I have to wire everything up from scratch, including new battery and siren. No big deal, but it takes a little longer to complete the task. Note that this is a 3-stop elevator. Ground floor, first and second, I start with hanging up all my out of order signs, and start working on the ground floor. 5 minutes in, just disassembled the old piece, the story begins. In comes the entitled woman, mid-40s, can walk perfectly fine, carrying one barely filled grocery bag. Me, yours truly. Ooh, entitled woman. D, her lovely daughter. Around 15 years old. Ooh, excuse me, is the elevator broken again? Me, not exactly ma'am, I'm changing this, showing her the new emergency light because the old one wasn't working anymore. This will probably take about an hour to complete. At this point her daughter walks in. Ooh, how am I supposed to get my groceries upstairs? Me, getting annoyed, I look at her bag, and give her the, are you ducking kidding me look. D, mum, seriously, take the stairs, it's 2 floors. Clearly annoyed. Ooh, no. I pay for this elevator, and I need it now. D, sigh, I'm going up. And takes the stairs. Ooh, how long is this going to take? Me, like I said, ma'am, about an hour. The woman then sits her ass down on a bench in the hallway waiting for me to finish. Really? Oh well, I do my thing in the cabin, not hurrying at all, mount the new E-light to the ceiling, and pack my things to go 1 floor up, to start the wiring on the top of the cabin. Ooh, you done yet? Me, no, ma'am, I still have to wire things up on top of the elevator. Ooh, no, I can see you're done, you're packing your things. Me, yes, I have to take my bag 1 floor up so I can start on the wiring. Ooh, can't I use it now? Me, no ma'am, you can't, there's exposed wiring up there, if you use it now you can cause a short and you will get stuck. It's really not safe. Ooh, fine. And she sits back down on the bench, seriously upset. I take my bag and make my way upstairs. As soon as I stand in front of the 1st floor door, I hear the door on the ground floor close, and sure enough, Ooh went into the elevator and tried to take it upstairs. Hell no, I wasn't having that. I take my emergency key and as soon as the elevator started moving I open the lock, cutting the safety chain, and the elevator comes to a sudden stop. This scared the shit out of her and she screams. I open the door and in my most fake surprised voice I yell, oh no, what have you done, while calmly pressing the emergency stop on top of the elevator. Yep, this thing isn't going anywhere soon. Me, this is exactly why I said the elevator is unsafe to use now. I'll do my best to get it working again as soon as possible, but you made a mess up here so I don't know how long it's going to take. There was no mess, but I couldn't resist teaching her a little lesson. Ooh, swears, yells, makes a scene. Me, I'll be right back, I have to go to the engine room to see if I can get it working again. I close the door, and make my way up. On the 2nd floor, the daughter came out of the apartment because of the yelling of her mother. I quickly explained what happened. D, raising her voice, oh no. Please get her out of there. But then she comes closer and whispers to me, don't hurry, make her suffer, that's my kind of girl. Music to my ears. I smile, give her a thumbs up, and make my way up to the engine room. I call my supervisor to explain the situation, in case she files a complaint. In the engine room I start playing around with the fuses, putting her in the dark, because yay, I haven't connected the E-light yet. I play with her for about half an hour before I turn off the emergency stop I activated. The elevator synchronizes to the lowest floor, and I wait for the doors to open. Me, please, don't ever do that again. Ooh, white as a sheet, shaking, and no, I won't. And she takes the stairs and goes inside. I never heard from her again. I calmly finish my job, and leave the building with a smile on my face. Mission accomplished. Edit: some people are having concerns about safety. I made sure there never was any risk. It was intentional that the elevator was able to move, because I needed it to. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to access the car top because of the distance between the floors. I tested all safeties I was going to need before I started the work. I disconnected the old light, which was conveniently with a plug, when I tested said car top safeties, so there never were exposed live wires. When I blocked the door with my bag, I never left the site. On every floor the "out of order" tag was placed over the floor call buttons, and the reason why I initially started working on the ground floor is so people who enter the building can clearly see me working when the elevator was still active. The moment when I started working on the car top, and people couldn't see me when entering the building, I did make use of the stop button, that I already tested, to prevent the elevator from reacting to calls. Every action I took was well thought out, potential risks were considered, and actions were taken to eliminate them. If I really needed that elevator to stay where it was, I would make sure it would. And the only people I've seen during that entire time I've been there were the two mentioned in the story. No, there never was any risk of anybody getting hurt. The next one is titled, Pro Revenge from a Revenge Pro. If you think about it cynically, one of the functions of the police is to provide a sort of society-wide revenge service. Unfortunately for this sub, it's usually kind of boring. When cops do take exceptional revenge, it's usually unfortunate and icky, like a dirty beating in the no-camera areas of the cop shop, or giving someone the silent patrolman treatment during transport. Fortunately, most cop revenge isn't dramatic, it's procedural. You misbehave, we do the paperwork, and eventually some consequences happen, or not. Sometimes, however, you get a chance to take a bit of vengeance that is, I hope, the very definition of professional. For a time, I was a small-town Canadian cop, working in Schicksville. Several years before I came to work in the town, there was an event which entered town legend, and made national news, the funny little throwaway story they go to just before the end of the broadcast. Some kids committed an act of spectacular and iconic vandalism, and cost the town quite a bit of money. They were all caught, tried and sentenced to probation terms with restitution. I would love to provide details, but anything more would be immediately identifying. All but one of the kids paid off quickly, served their probation without major incident and moved on with their lives. These were juvenile sentences and would in the ordinary course of things be purged from their records about 2 years after completion of probation. Unfortunately for one of them, whom we will refer to as Lackwit hereafter, this was only the beginning of a pattern of failure and incompetence that would mark his life from then on. Lackwit came from the kind of low-down redneck family that can't meet the standards of a transient's trailer park. They lived in decrepit trailers on a semi-serviced rural property that someone lent them out of pity. I wish I could tell you the moronic and laughable names these cretinous parents inflicted on their kids. Think Jesse James for the boys and Jezebel for the girls, and you're aiming too classy. I suppose his unfortunate nature wasn't his fault, but Lackwit seemed so dedicated to his banal evil and low-grade crime that any sympathy I might have had just kind of melted away. When I first arrived at the post, I was given my share of the list of the area's repeat offenders, who it would be my job to keep tabs on. Basically, the boss divided up all of the guys, gals on probation or other court supervision, and every constable was responsible for any new charges involving one of their guys. Lackwit was to be my problem for the next 3 to 5 years. I spoke with his probation officer, and was told that Lackwit hadn't paid one dime of his restitution, and in fact had been charged with breaching his probation by not doing so. He had also not been doing required community service, had missed probation appointments, and was generally not a great subject. She recommended additional breach charges, which we duly laid. The matter wended its leisurely way through the justice system, and eventually Lackwit appeared before a judge. Out in these rural circuits, the judges come by once a month, and it's frequently the same judge seeing these redneck recidivists again and again. This judge turned out to be the same one who had sentenced Lackwit to probation for his initial vandalism, and the subsequent breaches. Of course, on each of these occasions, Lackwit had begged the mercy of the court, promised to get his life together and so on. Understand, we're now more than 4 years out from the initial vandalism event. This might have worked on this occasion too, but the restitution became a sticking point. This town was small, and they needed the money from the restitution to repair some of the damage. We had a victim statement from the town about the things they couldn't afford to do without raising rates on their taxpayers. We had evidence of the reasons Lackwit wasn't holding down jobs, attendance, unreliability, pot use at work, and we had evidence of the money he had made but not bothered to pay to the town. Judge decides to throw the book at Lackwit this time. He puts him on a CSO. Although Lackwit's original charges were youth charges, and would have been purged, his breach of probation occurred after his 18th birthday, so is an adult charge and semi-permanent on his record. Nice work, chump. A digression on the Canadian justice system. We don't like to put people in prison. This is for a number of reasons. We're cheap and prison is expensive, our jails are hideously overcrowded and ill-maintained, and it flat out doesn't work anyways. Trust me on this, if you aren't committing crimes against persons or involving sex or firearms, you aren't likely to go to jail on a first offense unless you're doing damage, stealing into the millions. End digression. A CSO is like a super probation order. It's technically a jail sentence, but one you serve outside of a jail. The judge can order you to stay at a particular location, can give you a curfew or house arrest, and can impose practically any conditions she feels will assist you in successfully completing your term. The CSO also has some procedural differences from a probation order which will be important later. In this case, it had a pretty strict curfew among other things. Lackwit is terrible at complying with his order. We give him a few warnings about curfew breaches, and notify his PO. Lackwit is formally cautioned. It comes to pass that Lackwit asks probation for permission to do a thing, and is denied. Lackwit does the thing anyways, and becomes aware that we know about it. We stop by Lackwit's house to have a discussion, and Lackwit decides to go on the lam. He rabbits, and we don't see him again for a while. A breach of the CSO is filed and approved by prosecution. At this point, Lackwit knows he's going to be jailed for at least a week or two, and being a virgin jail-wise, has no intention of being caught. Over the next few weeks, we are told by sources, you would call them snitches, what Lackwit is up to. He has couch-surfed until he wore out his welcome with his few friends, and is now living in an abandoned car behind a friend's house. Friend's dad hates him, so Lackwit has to sneak in and out and spends his days wandering disconsolately around town trying to find people to hang out with, or who might lend him money. I begin to see Lackwit around town but pretend not to. I go by his house from time to time, but he is never home. Sources say his parents want him to turn self in, get us off their backs, but he is convinced he's going to go to jail and get raped. Not likely, but hey, he hasn't let us explain that, and they will not let him stay there. I visit his friends, and make a point of being very obvious when I visit friend's house with the derelict car. I never find Lackwit, but am told that he spends several cold nights in the bush after our visits. At this time, I have a rookie with me. One day we come across Lackwit and he bolts. Rookie is gung-ho and she starts to chase. I catch up and after a token effort tell her to stop. She asks why. We could have caught him. Hell, Lackwit is lanky but has the grace and coordination of a professional esports player. Even with 20 kilograms of crap strapped on, catching him isn't going to be a problem. Look, I tell Rookie, I don't want to actually catch Lackwit. Rookie is baffled. We've been out to look for Lackwit maybe a half dozen times this month. I explain, the thing is, Lackwit is punishing himself far more than the court will, and he's providing a great lesson to his friends about the consequences of this kind of life. Now, the thing about a probation order is that it has a fixed duration. From the date you begin to serve it, it runs for X months. If you're out of the country, in jail, or on the run, the order still runs out. CSO doesn't work this way. If a CSO breach is filed, the CSO stops counting down. I tell this to my wide-eyed rookie, then add, if I'd picked him up 3 months ago, he'd have done a week or so in cells with a warm bed and 3 meals per day, then been out again with a firm slap on the wrist. This way, he can live like a hunted animal until he gets tired of it, then serve the same amount of time as he would have if he'd just turned himself in. He ended up turning himself in a couple months later, when the fall nights got a bit too nippy for him. For the next few years, I would use the story, now well known locally, of Lackwit's carpartment to frighten young juvenile offenders and to convince them to comply with probation. The next one is titled, Don't Want to Pay for the Work Done, Have a Dead Yard. Quick backstory to keep it from being too boring. I had recently lost my job, like most people at the time, and was having to do odd jobs on Craigslist just to get by. I recruited a friend to help me do the various odd jobs since he was in a similar situation. We pooled our resources and cobbled together enough equipment to do landscaping work along with other odd jobs that you'd hire manual labor for. We were both young, like early 20s, and didn't really know when we were getting scammed or fooled. We got a call on one of our ads to go do some landscaping work for a guy who happened to live about a mile away. Awesome. We won't have to spend much on gas, but we will have to sacrifice our Labor Day weekend to do the job since it was a large job. The guy asked us to put in a raised bed that essentially wrapped around his entire house. Imagine a house in a newly built subdivision that has a smallish yard and few trees. He wanted the bed to be built with landscaping bricks and wanted us to copy a style that his neighbor had done. Cool, no problem. We try to discuss payment, but he keeps giving us the runaround. Because we were in a desperate situation, we get fooled into doing the work with no agreed upon labor fee. This was our mistake, one that was never made again. We were just happy to have some work. We spent 2 full days working our asses off in the middle of summer, not really knowing what we were getting paid. We were using our tools, truck, and time, grinding away, but we kept wondering why this guy was acting so shady. Finally, on day 3, near the end of the day, I'm fed up with the runaround and knock on the door and confront the guy about payment. He starts getting all aggressive and starts threatening us with non-payment, which immediately escalates the situation. I grab my friend and bring him into the argument. After about 30 minutes of arguing, the guy decides he will pay us $70 for the work. Yeah, 70 ducking bucks to split between us after 3 days of labor. Cool, duck us right. We loaded up our truck with the tools, then wait for the guy to come out with our cash. This a-hole comes out with a huge wad of cash, but proceeds to still only hand over $70. We collect our money and grab our last item, a tarp. We had been using a really large tarp to put weeds, grass, and extra dirt on to make our lives easier since we didn't have a wheelbarrow at the time. The accumulated mound on this thing had to have been 4 feet high. We drag it into the middle of his front yard and dump the tarp. This is the first duck you. He was begging us not to do it, but he could eat a dick at this point. We load up and peel out because, you know, angry youngsters. Now for the pro-revenge part. My friend's mum was a real landscaper. She heard our story and offered up some excellent revenge advice. Take the backpack sprayers we had, fill them with a warm saltwater mix, then ride over and spray his yard. We planned to do this about 2 months later. When the time came, we executed the plan late at night, around 2 a.m. We parked down at the pool parking lot, walked down to his house, and absolutely bombed this dude's yard. We came back about a month later and everything was dead or dying, flowers, grass, small trees, all of it. Duck with the guys that are doing your yard work? Duck your yard. The last one is titled, I Destroyed a Brewery. Nearly 20 years ago, I was a brewer at a brewpub. The owner was a complete lunatic and an utter a-hole. Before I was hired, he had already purchased the brewery equipment, used, from a closed microbrewery. Problem is, it was literally 4 times larger than it needed to be for the size of the place, and to top it off he was selling Big 3 beers too. And it was a Pugsley system, brewers will know. But I made it work, even got the stupid ringwalled yeast to behave. But I only need to brew about 3 or 4 times a month. I have worked at places we brewed that much a week, so I wasn't needed anywhere near 40 hours per week. And I was salaried. So he decided I needed to work night manager at least 2 nights a week, to fill out my hours. That was fine, it was an easy gig. After our first year, he advertised a huge anniversary event, with specials on food and drink. Food specials. Commercial beer specials. And didn't even mention that we made our own, much less put anything on special. Idiot. Not too long after, I got my first vacation in over a year. And he was mad at me for insisting. But life was stressful, not least of which because my mum was in hospice, stage 4 cancer. But her condition was such that she said my wife and I should go, she'll be fine. So we went camping for a week. The day before our trip was to end, we got word she had died. 2 days earlier. My family didn't know how to reach us, only she did. We rushed home, 6-hour drive, and on the way I called my boss and told him what had happened, and that I probably would not be in on Monday as planned. This was Saturday. I found out later from a bartender that he then bitched at the chef that I was probably going to want more time off. I did in fact take Monday off, but I went in on Tuesday to do my night manager shift. Now, my mum's wishes were to be cremated, with no embalming, so by the time I got home, she was already cremated. So the memorial service was planned for 2 weeks later, right before Labor Day weekend. There was to be a memorial service Thursday, and the interment for the family Friday. So I planned and made sure that the servers were full and I wouldn't need to brew for at least a week. That Wednesday the boss comes and tells me he wants me to work night shift on Thursday and Friday. Normally I did Tuesday and Wednesday nights to make up for the time off I'd taken to help my dad out. He wasn't handling it well. He wanted me to come in after my mum's funeral. I flatly refused, at which point he said fine, but I'd have to work a double shift Saturday then. I nearly lost it. I walked away, and after I cooled off I went back and told him I was no longer going to do the manager shifts, and that I wanted to switch to hourly for brewery work only. He was angry, but stuck. He needed me in the brewery. Things started calming down, but after a few weeks I noticed my paychecks were for less than I anticipated. I hadn't been tracking my clock in, clock out very closely, because prior to this I only clocked in and out, so I was logged in to do manager functions, but I happened to have a couple of slips in my wallet, and because I still had manager access, discovered he had been altering my hours, eventually cheating me out of around 20 hours in just 6 weeks. And that's when I hatched my plan. I was done with this a whole. Remember that ringwood yeast? Well, in a brewery, you harvest yeast from a fermenting batch to use to brew a later one. And since we were slow, it often had to be stored for a while before it got used. But you had to use it within 30 days, 21 is better, or it goes sour and starts dying. Normally I would take other steps to ensure it stayed clean and healthy, but not on the last batch I harvested. It just went into the cold room. And stayed there. I stopped going in very often, just logging tank levels to make sure nothing ran out and made him suspicious. I would even go in to make sure he wasn't in that day, and later message him that I'd brewed, I hadn't. And waited. On day 45, after I got the check for the last hours I worked, I overnighted my keys in with a resignation letter. He called me the next day, screaming. I told him I knew what he'd done, and I wouldn't be back. I don't know what he looked like when he went into the brewery cellar and discovered he had empty fermenters, nearly empty serving tanks, dead yeast, and almost no grain. Pity really. After that, he tried to hire my former assistant, who was working at another brewpub by then because the a-hole had forced me to fire him to save money. He laughed at him. He then apparently got the underage son of one of the brewers at a nearby brewpub which he had originally been part of to brew for him, but had to fire him because the kid kept getting caught drunk down in the cellar. So he tried doing it, and I had heard they stopped brewing entirely eventually. About a year after I left, he folded. Staff showed up one morning to padlock doors. Drove through there a few years back, not only gone but building was torn down. I felt like stopping to sow the ground with salt, but I was in a hurry. Thanks for listening.